The citadel of Vorn floated in the darkness of space like a god's fist. It was massive beyond belief. Thousands of ships could fit inside its walls, and millions of beings lived within its protected zones. The walls themselves glowed with a soft blue light that never faded, never flickered, and never failed. For 11,000 years, those walls had stood against everything the universe could throw at them. Every species in the Galactic Concord knew the story. The Vornathi had built their fortress in an age when most civilizations were still learning to make fire. They had discovered secrets of physics that no other race had ever found. Their walls were made of something called quantum lattice, a material that existed in multiple states at once. When something hit the wall simply became whatever it needed to be to stop it. Armies had tried to break through. Fleets had died trying. The Kethvari had once thrown 300 warships at the Citadel in a single day. None survived. The Malurian hegemony had built a weapon that could crack planets in half. Against the walls of Vorn, it did nothing. The walls absorbed the energy, learned from it, and became stronger. After so many failures, the galaxy had simply accepted the truth. The Citadel of Vorn could not be broken. The Vornathi who lived inside were untouchable. And because they were untouchable, they had grown cruel. 46 species now lived under Vornathi rule. Not inside the Citadel, but in the space around it. Their worlds paid tribute. Their ships carried Vornathi goods. Their people worked in Vornathi mines and factories. If any species refused to obey, the Vornathi would simply close the walls around them. They would trap entire fleets behind barriers of quantum lattice, leaving them to starve in the void. No one could stop them. No one could even threaten them. The walls made sure of that. The Galactic Concord, which was supposed to keep peace among the stars, had given up trying. Their official position was that the Vornathi situation was regrettable but unchangeable. Behind closed doors, they simply called it the wall problem and tried not to think about it. Then the humans arrived. Humanity was new to the galaxy. They had only been traveling between stars for about 300 years. In the grand scale of galactic civilization, they were babies. Their ships were small and poorly armed. Their technology was basic compared to the elder races. They had no ancient secrets, no superweapons, no vast fleets. What they had was a ship called the UES Perseverance. The Perseverance was not a warship. It was an exploration vessel, designed to map new systems and make contact with unknown species. Its hull was patched in 17 places where accidents and encounters had nearly destroyed it. Its engines made a sound that the chief engineer described as deeply concerning. Its crew of 43 humans had been away from Earth for 4 years, and they were tired, underfunded, and very far from home. Captain Adara Okonkwo stood on the bridge and looked at the Citadel of Vorn on the main screen. She was a tall woman with gray in her hair and lines on her face that came from too many years of difficult decisions. Her uniform was clean but worn. Her eyes were sharp but tired. "That's it?" she asked. Her first officer, Commander Torres, nodded. "That's the famous impenetrable fortress. The one nobody can break." Okonkwo studied the glowing walls. "It's big, very big. And those walls have really stopped everything?" Torres pulled up the records on his screen. Antimatter bombardment, plasma lances, graviton beams, singularity bombs, phase shift weaponry, biological attacks, nanite swarms, even a focused beam of pure dark energy from the Ethkali homeworld. He shook his head. Nothing worked. The walls adapted to everything. Chief Engineer Kowalski spoke up from his station. He was a heavy-set man with grease permanently under his fingernails and a habit of talking to machines like they were people. "Adapted how?" "Unknown," Torres said. The Concord's records just say the walls analyze incoming attacks and restructure themselves to counter them. Kowalski frowned. That's not very specific. Nobody knows the specifics. The Vornathi don't share their secrets, and nobody's ever gotten close enough to study the walls properly. Okonkwo was still staring at the screen. Why are we here, Torres? The Concord wants us to establish diplomatic contact. See if the Vornathi will talk to humanity about trade agreements. And the 46 enslaved species? Torres hesitated. The Concord's position is that we shouldn't interfere with existing power structures. Silence fell over the bridge. Every member of the crew knew what that meant. The Concord wanted humanity to make friends with the slave masters and ignore the slaves. It was politics. It was practical. It was the smart thing to do. OKO and KWO turned away from the screen. Lieutenant Chen, run a full sensor sweep of those walls. I want to know everything our equipment can tell us. Chen, a young woman who handled sensors and communications, started working her console. Captain, our sensors aren't nearly as good as what the elder races have. If they couldn't figure out the walls, run the sweep anyway. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Yusuf, the ship's science officer, moved to stand beside the captain. He was a quiet man who preferred data to conversation, but something in Okonkwo's voice had caught his attention. Captain, are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Okonkwo didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked a question. Doctor, in your experience, when a problem is declared unsolvable, what does that usually mean? Yusuf considered this. It usually means that everyone who tried to solve it used the same methods. And when someone uses a different method? A small smile crossed the doctor's face. Sometimes the unsolvable gets solved. Okonkwo nodded slowly. 11,000 years. Hundreds of species. Countless attacks. All failures. She looked around at her small, tired, underfunded crew. But they were all thinking like galactic civilizations. Like beings who had the same basic understanding of warfare and physics and strategy. Kowalski caught on. And we don't think like them. No, we don't. Okonkwo sat down in her captain's chair. Humanity spent most of its history fighting itself. We've built walls and broken walls since before we had metal tools. We've developed siege warfare, guerrilla tactics, psychological operations, and ways of thinking about obstacles that nobody else in the galaxy has ever needed to develop. Torres looked worried. Captain, the Concord ordered us to establish diplomatic contact, not to start a war with an empire that has defeated everyone who ever challenged them. Okonkwo smiled. It was not a comforting smile. I'm not planning to start a war, Commander. I'm planning to ask a question that nobody else has bothered to ask. What question? She pointed at the glowing walls on the screen. What exactly are those things made of? Not what they do. Not what they stop, but what they actually are, at the most basic level. The crew exchanged glances. It seemed like such a simple question, but in 11,000 years, nobody had ever really answered it. Maybe it was time someone tried. The Perseverance hid in an asteroid field for 9 days. It was not a comfortable hiding spot. The ship had to dodge spinning rocks while running silent, keeping all major systems at minimum power to avoid detection by Vornathi patrols. The crew ate cold rations and slept in shifts. Tensions grew as the days passed, but Captain Okonkwo had given orders, and her crew followed them. They would stay hidden until they understood what they were dealing with. Chief Engineer Kowalski worked without rest. He sat at his console for hours at a time, studying the sensor data from the walls. His eyes grew red, and his hands shook from too much coffee, but he refused to stop. Something about the walls bothered him. Something that did not fit. On the third day, he called the captain to engineering. Look at this, he said, pointing at a display filled with numbers and graphs. The walls give off a constant energy signature. Very steady, very stable. But watch what happens when something gets close. He played a recording from their sensors. A piece of asteroid debris had drifted near the citadel. As it approached the walls, the energy signature changed slightly. Just a tiny shift, barely noticeable. The walls noticed the debris, Kowalski said. They analyzed it, decided it wasn't a threat, then went back to normal. Okonkwo frowned. They noticed a random piece of rock? They notice everything. That's the key. Kowalski pulled up more data. I went through the Concorde's old records. Every attack ever recorded against the walls. You know what I found? The walls don't just stop attacks. They study them. They learn from them. And then they reconfigure themselves to be immune to that exact type of attack. Dr. Yusuf had joined them, drawn by the excitement in Kowalski's voice. That explains why nothing works twice. The Kethvari used plasma weapons. The walls learned to absorb plasma. The Malurians used graviton beams. The walls learned to deflect gravitons. Exactly, Kowalski said. But here's the thing that nobody seems to have thought about. What if the walls only know what they've been taught? Silence filled the engineering bay. Okonkwo leaned forward. Explain. 11,000 years of attacks. Hundreds of species. But they all fought the same basic way. Shoot something at the wall. Try to break through with force. Kowalski's eyes were bright with discovery. The walls have been trained to stop force. They're really, really good at it. But what if someone attacked in a way that didn't use force at all? Dr. Yusuf shook his head slowly. That's actually brilliant. The walls are adaptive, but they can only adapt to things they recognize as threats. If they can't categorize an attack, they can't counter it. Lieutenant Chun's voice came over the intercom. She had been listening from the bridge. Captain, I've been analyzing the wall's response patterns. Dr. Yusuf is right. The walls use a very advanced decision-making system. It classifies incoming objects and energy patterns, determines threat level, and generates an appropriate response. What happens if it can't classify something? Okonkwo asked. Unknown. It's never happened. Every attack in recorded history has been some form of energy or matter that the walls could analyze and categorize. Commander Torres spoke up. He had been quiet through the whole discussion, but now he looked worried. Captain, what exactly are you planning? We can't attack the Citadel. We have one ship. One small, damaged ship with no real weapons. Okonkwo smiled. Who said anything about weapons? She walked to the main display and called up everything they knew about the walls. The data floated in the air before them, patterns and numbers and energy readings. The walls are smart, she said. Smarter than any computer system we've ever seen. They can analyze anything and adapt to it. That's their strength. She paused. But it's also their weakness. Torres still looked confused. How is incredible intelligence a weakness? Because intelligence requires patterns, rules, logic. Okonkwo turned to face her crew. The walls are designed to face threats that make sense. Weapons that have a purpose. Attacks that follow a strategy. But what if we attacked with something that makes no sense at all? Kowalski started laughing. You want to confuse the walls? Attack them with... What? Nonsense? Exactly. Okonkwo's voice was serious. Humanity has spent its whole history being unpredictable. We do things that don't make logical sense. We take stupid risks. We solve problems in ways that shouldn't work. Other species look at us and can't figure out what we're going to do next. Dr. Yusuf was nodding slowly. Cognitive overload. If the walls try to analyze inputs that contradict each other, that don't fit any known pattern, they might lock up, Chun finished. like a computer trying to process an impossible equation. Torres held up his hands. This is insane. You're suggesting that we attack an 11,000-year-old fortress by being confusing? That's your plan? Okonkwo met his eyes. Commander, every civilization in this galaxy has tried to beat those walls by being bigger, stronger, and more powerful. It didn't work. Maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe it's time to be human. The next 6 days were spent planning. The crew of the Perseverance threw ideas at each other. Most of them were ridiculous. Some were impossible. A few were so strange that they circled back around to being brilliant. Kowalski suggested attacking with music. Sound waves carry information, but music doesn't mean anything in a combat sense. The walls won't know what to do with it. Chun proposed sending medical equipment. Nanits designed to heal injuries. Completely harmless. But the walls will have to analyze them, try to figure out if they're dangerous. Dr. Yusuf wanted to try pure randomness. We transmit mathematical sequences that don't follow any pattern. Prime numbers mixed with poetry, mixed with encrypted garbage. Let the walls try to decode that. Every idea was recorded. Every suggestion was considered. By the end of the 6th day, they had a list of 217 separate attack vectors. None of them were weapons in any traditional sense. All of them were designed to be absolutely, completely, wonderfully confusing. On the morning of the 7th day, Captain Okonkwo gathered her crew on the bridge. In 3 days, we're going to do something that no one has ever tried, she said. We're going to attack an impenetrable fortress without trying to penetrate it. We're going to assault an unbreakable wall without trying to break it. And if we're very lucky and very clever, we're going to prove that nothing in this universe is truly impossible. She looked at each of them in turn. 43 tired, underfunded, far-from-home humans in a battered ship held together by determination and spare parts. Any questions? Kowalski raised his hand. Captain, what if this doesn't work? Okonkwo considered the question. Then we'll have failed doing something no one else ever thought to try. And that's still better than never trying at all. The crew of the Perseverance began their final preparations. In 2 days, they would face the greatest fortress ever built. They planned to defeat it with confusion, chaos, and the uniquely human talent for doing things that made absolutely no sense. The attack began at 3 in the morning, ship time. There was no particular reason for this. Captain Okonkwo had chosen the hour randomly, because randomness was the whole point. The Perseverance emerged from the asteroid field and headed straight toward the citadel of Vorn. Every sensor in the system detected them immediately. Warning signals flashed across Vornathi command screens. Patrol ships began to turn toward the small human vessel, but the Perseverance was not heading for a fight. It stopped at the very edge of the wall's detection range and began to do something very strange. Lieutenant Chun fired the first shot. It was a single torpedo, armed with a standard explosive warhead. The walls detected it instantly, analyzed it, and generated a perfect counter. The torpedo vanished in a flash of energy, absorbed completely. 3 seconds later, Chun fired again. This time, she launched a medical probe filled with healing nanits. Tiny machines designed to repair broken bones and damaged tissue. Completely harmless. Designed to help, not hurt. The walls detected the probe. They scanned it. They found no weapons, no explosives, no threat. But it was approaching the citadel, so it had to be analyzed. The defensive systems tried to categorize it. Was it an attack? No. Was it dangerous? No. Should it be stopped? The walls weren't sure. Before they could decide, Chief Engineer Kowalski activated the communication array. He began broadcasting music directly at the walls. Not just one song, but dozens at once. Classical symphonies mixed with heavy metal. Children's lullabies played over screaming guitars. Traditional songs from 12 different Earth cultures, all at maximum volume, all at the same time. The walls detected the transmissions. Sound waves carrying complex patterns. Was this a coded message? An attempt to hack their systems? A weapon of some kind? They analyzed and analyzed, but the music meant nothing. It was just noise. Beautiful, chaotic, meaningless noise. Dr. Yusuf launched his probe while the walls were still processing the music. His container held nothing but living bacteria from Earth's oceans. Tiny organisms that had no purpose, posed no threat, and served no function except to exist. Attached to the container was a handwritten note on paper. Actual paper, made from wood pulp, covered in ink marks. The note read, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" The walls scanned the bacteria. Living organisms? Biological threat? No, too small, too simple. Were they carrying disease? No. Poison? No. What were they for? Unknown. What was the paper? Unknown. What did the message mean? Unknown. 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 More attacks followed. Commander Torres launched a shuttle filled with rubber balls. Nothing else. Just balls, bouncing around inside an empty vessel, heading toward the Citadel for no reason at all. The walls stopped the shuttle, but could not understand why it had been sent. Chun transmitted recordings of human laughter. Hours of it. People laughing at jokes, laughing at accidents, laughing for no reason. The walls tried to decode the sounds. Was this language? Was it a signal? Was it a psychological weapon? They could not determine the answer. Kowalski led a small team in another shuttle. They landed on the outer surface of the walls themselves, where no one had stood in 11,000 years. And then they did something truly inexplicable. They started hitting the walls with tools, not energy weapons, not explosives, just ordinary hand tools. Hammers and wrenches and pieces of metal pipe. They banged on the walls while arguing loudly with each other about the best way to do it. "You're not hitting it hard enough," Kowalski shouted. "I'm hitting it plenty hard. You're hitting the wrong spot." "There's no wrong spot. It's a wall." "Then why isn't it breaking?" "Because you're doing it wrong." The walls analyzed this behavior. They had stopped bombardments from dreadnoughts. They had survived weapons that could destroy stars. And now, small beings were standing on their surface, hitting them with primitive tools and yelling at each other. What was the threat level? 0. What was the purpose? Unknown. What was the correct response? Unknown. The walls began to struggle. Inside the Citadel, alarms started sounding. Not attack alarms. Those would have meant the walls knew what was happening. These were different alarms. Confusion alarms. Error warnings. System notifications that something was wrong with the defensive grid. High hierarch. Vashka looked at his displays and saw something he had never seen before. The wall's status indicators were flickering between states: active, passive, alert, dormant. The system could not decide what mode to be in because it could not decide what it was facing. What are they doing? He demanded. His advisors had no answer. The humans were attacking without attacking. They were threatening without being threatening. They were doing everything and nothing at the same time. On the bridge of the Perseverance, Captain Okonkwo watched the wall's energy signature change. The steady blue glow was starting to pulse irregularly. Sections of the wall were switching between different states, trying to counter threats that weren't threats, trying to understand attacks that weren't attacks. "It's working," she said quietly. "Keep going." For 3 days, the assault continued. The crew of the Perseverance threw everything they had at the walls. Contradictory signals. Meaningless objects. actions that defied all logic and strategy. Someone launched a probe containing nothing but a single flower from Earth. The walls analyzed it for 6 hours before giving up. Someone else transmitted a complete recording of a human sneeze. Then another sneeze. Then 1,000 sneezes in sequence. A team painted smiley faces on a section of the wall using ordinary yellow paint. The walls could not determine if this was an attack or decoration. Lieutenant Chun sent a continuous broadcast of a human arguing with himself. Both sides of the argument were equally valid and equally invalid. The walls tried to determine which position was the correct one and failed. By the third day, the walls were in chaos. Their adaptive systems were working overtime, trying to categorize inputs that could not be categorized. Their defensive matrices were switching between states so fast that the whole structure was beginning to destabilize. And on the morning of the fourth day, something happened that had not happened in 11,000 years. A crack appeared in the walls of the citadel of VORN. It was small, just a thin line, barely visible, running across a section of the quantum lattice structure. But it was there. The impenetrable was starting to penetrate. The unbreakable was starting to break. Captain Okonkwo stared at the crack on her display screen. Around her, her crew was cheering. They had done the impossible. They had found a weakness in the greatest fortress ever built. "Don't stop now," Okonkwo ordered, her voice cutting through the celebration. "We've heard it, but it's not dead yet. Keep hitting it. Keep confusing it. Don't give it time to adapt." The attacks resumed with new energy. The crew of the Perseverance worked harder than they ever had before. They invented new confusions, created new impossibilities, generated new chaos. And the crack in the wall began to grow. Inside the citadel, the Vornithi watched in horror as their perfect protection started to fail. For the first time in their history, they felt something they had never felt before. Fear. The walls that had protected them for millennia were falling. And they were falling to a species that had been traveling the stars for only 300 years. The humans were coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The citadel of Vorn fell on the 6th day. Not to weapons, not to overwhelming force. The walls simply stopped working. Their adaptive systems, overwhelmed by inputs they could not categorize, had entered a loop. They kept trying to analyze threats that were not threats, trying to counter attacks that were not attacks. Eventually, the strain became too much. The quantum lattice structure began to collapse, not all at once, but slowly, section by section. By the time the sun rose on the 6th day, there were gaps in the walls large enough to fly capital ships through. The crew of the Perseverance watched from their bridge as the most impenetrable fortress in history came apart. There was no celebration this time. They were too tired for that, too amazed by what they had accomplished. 43 humans in a battered exploration vessel had done what entire fleets could not do. Captain Okonkwo stood at the main window, looking at the crumbling walls. Beside her, Commander Torres shook his head slowly. "I still can't believe it worked," he said. "Neither can they," Okonkwo replied, pointing to the Vornithi ships that were now moving through the gaps. They were not attacking. They were escorting other vessels. Refugee ships from the 46 enslaved species, finally free to leave. True to his word, High Hierarch Voshkal had released them all. The tribute agreements were cancelled. The hostages were freed. 11,000 years of Vornithi domination ended, not with a great battle, but with a quiet conversation and a handshake. Lieutenant Chun turned from her station. "Captain, we're receiving transmissions from everywhere. The Galactic Concord, the Kethvari, the Malurians, about a dozen other species I've never heard of. They all want to talk to us. What are they saying?" Chun looked at her display, scrolling through message after message. Mostly they want to know how we did it. Also, several of them want to offer us defensive contracts. A few are asking if we'd be willing to teach them our methods." She paused, and one of them just wants to know what the rubber balls were for. Kowalski laughed from his engineering station. "Tell them we're not sure either." It seemed like a good idea at the time. The Galactic Concorde's official report on the Siege of Vorn ran to 3,000 pages. It analyzed every attack the Perseverance had made. It studied the energy signatures, the transmission patterns, the strange objects that had been launched at the walls. It interviewed Vornathi technicians and human crew members. It ran simulations and calculated probabilities. In the end, the report concluded that what had happened should not have been possible. The human approach to siege warfare did not match any known strategy. Their attacks followed no logical pattern. Their success could not be replicated because nobody could explain exactly what they had done or why it had worked. The final paragraph of the report said simply, "Human tactical methodology remains poorly understood. Further study is not recommended, as observation may not survive contact." But the unofficial version of what happened spread much faster. In cantinas and trading posts across 1,000 worlds, beings told the story of the small human ship and the great walls it had brought down. The story changed with each telling, growing larger and stranger. But the core message stayed the same. Do not build walls against humans. They will find a way through. Not because they are stronger or smarter or more advanced than everyone else. Not because they have better weapons or larger fleets. They will find a way through because somewhere in their strange, contradictory nature, they simply refuse to believe that walls are real obstacles. Years passed. The Citadel of Vorn was dismantled, its quantum lattice technology studied and eventually shared with the galaxy. The Vornathi, freed from their dependence on their walls, slowly began to change. It was not easy, and it was not fast, but they learned to interact with other species as equals rather than masters. The 46 liberated species built new lives, new governments, new futures. Many of them remembered the humans who had freed them. Some built monuments. Others wrote songs. A few just quietly raised a glass whenever Earth was mentioned. Captain Adara Okonkwo was promoted to Admiral. She spent the rest of her career commanding exploration missions to the far edges of known space. But wherever she went, the story of the Siege of Vorn followed her. One evening, many years later, a young officer asked her about it. They were sitting in the officer's lounge of a space station, watching ships pass by the window. The officer was curious about the legend, about the woman who had done the impossible. "Admiral, what really happened at Vorn? How did you know the walls could be beaten?" Okonkwo took a sip of her drink. She was older now, her hair fully gray, her face lined with the marks of a long and eventful life. But her eyes were still sharp, still filled with the curiosity and determination that had defined her career. "I didn't know," she admitted. "Not for certain. I just knew that everyone who had tried before had done the same thing. They had looked at the walls and seen something unbreakable. They had fought like beings who expected to lose. And you didn't?" I looked at the walls and saw a problem that hadn't been solved yet. That's all any wall is. A problem waiting for someone stubborn enough to find the answer. The young officer thought about this. But why you? Why humans? We're not the smartest species in the galaxy. See? We're not the strongest. Why were we the ones who figured it out? Okonkwo smiled. It was the same smile she had worn on the bridge of the Perseverance all those years ago. Tired and proud and unbroken. Because we're not smart enough to know what's impossible. Other species look at a challenge and calculate the odds. They analyze the risks. They decide whether victory is probable. And when the odds say they can't win, they accepted. She turned to look out the window at the endless stars beyond. Humans don't work that way. We look at impossible odds and we think, maybe, just maybe. We try things that shouldn't work. We fail in ways that no one expected. And sometimes, just often enough, we succeed in ways that nobody thought possible. She raised her glass in a quiet toast. The galaxy has lots of walls. Big ones, old ones. Walls that everyone agrees cannot be broken. But give us time, and we'll find a way through every single one. Not because we're special, because we're too stubborn, too strange, and too gloriously human to accept that anything is truly impossible. Across the galaxy, in bars and meeting halls and quiet spaces where beings gathered to share stories, the saying continued to spread. It became a proverb, a warning, a promise that no wall in the universe survived once a human struck, not because humans struck hardest, not because they struck smartest, but because they struck in ways that no one else would ever think to try. And in the end, that made all the difference. On the 5th day of the siege, the Vornathi sent a message. They wanted to talk. Captain Okonkwo received a transmission on the bridge of the Perseverance. High Hierarch Vashkel himself appeared on the screen, his alien face arranged in an expression that might have been anger or fear or both. The Vornathi were tall, thin beings with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed with inner light. Vashkel wore robes of deep purple, the color of Vornathi royalty. Human, he said, the word coming through the translator with obvious distaste. You will cease your attack immediately. Okonkwo leaned back in her chair. She had not slept more than a few hours in the past 5 days. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair was messy, and she had a coffee stain on her sleeve. But her voice was calm and steady. I don't think I will, she said. Vashkel's glow brightened with anger. You do not understand your situation. The Vornathi have ruled this region of space for 11,000 years. Our walls have defeated every enemy who ever challenged us. You are nothing, a minor species in a damaged ship. You cannot win. And yet here we are, Okonkwo replied, having this conversation, which you requested. The Hierarch paused. She had a point, and he knew it. If the Vornathi were truly unworried, they would not be talking. They would simply wait for the walls to deal with the threat, as they always had. The fact that Vashkel had reached out meant that the walls were not dealing with the threat. Come to the Citadel, Vashkel said finally. Face me in person if you have the courage. We will discuss terms. Okonkwo smiled slightly. Terms of what? Surrender? Terms of understanding. The Hierarch looked uncomfortable. Perhaps there is a way to end this situation that benefits both our peoples. Commander Torres leaned close to Okonkwo. Captain, this could be a trap. They could be trying to lure you inside and capture you. Probably, Okonkwo agreed. But I want to see the inside of that fortress. And I want them to see me. Sometimes, the best weapon is showing up. She stood and straightened her uniform as best she could. Tell the Hierarch I'll be there in 1 hour. The shuttle carried Okonkwo through the crack in the walls. It had grown larger over the past day, wide enough for a small vessel to pass through. As she flew, she studied the walls from the inside. They were even more impressive up close. Layers of quantum lattice stretched in every direction, glowing and pulsing with contained energy. But now that energy was unstable. The walls were sick, confused, unable to function properly. She landed in a docking bay that could have held 1,000 ships. Instead, it was empty except for a small group of Vornathi guards and the High Hierarch himself. Vashkel had come in person to meet her. That told her something about how serious the situation was. Okonkwo walked toward him across the empty bay. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space. She was very aware that she was alone, far from her ship, surrounded by beings who had every reason to want her dead. But she did not let that show on her face. "Hi, Hierarch," she said when she stood before him. "Thank you for receiving me." Vashkal studied her with his glowing eyes. "You are smaller than I expected. We often are. And older. The great warriors of galactic history are usually young and strong." Okonkwo shrugged. "I'm not a warrior. I'm an explorer. I came to this region to map star systems and meet new species. Attacking your fortress wasn't exactly on my schedule." The Hierarch made a sound that might have been a laugh. "And yet you attacked anyway. Why?" "Your people have no stake in our affairs. The species we rule are nothing to you. You could have passed through our space, established trade agreements, gone on your way. Instead, you chose to challenge us." "I didn't challenge you," Okonkwo corrected. "I challenged your walls. The walls are us. We are the walls. They have defined our civilization for 11,000 years." Okonkwo looked around at the vast, empty docking bay. "That's exactly the problem." Vashko's glow flickered. "Explain." She took a deep breath. She had thought about this moment for days, planning what she would say if she ever got the chance. Now, the chance was here. "Humans have a long history with walls," she began. "We've built them and destroyed them for thousands of years. Walls around cities. Walls around countries. Walls between people. We've stood on both sides. We've been the ones protected and the ones kept out. And we've learned something important. What have you learned? Walls aren't about keeping people out." "Not really." Okonkwo met the Hierarch's glowing eyes. "Walls are about making people believe they can't get in. The moment someone truly believes they can pass a wall, truly believes it in their heart, the wall has already failed. Everything after that is just details." Vashko was silent for a long moment. "You are saying that our walls only worked because everyone believed they were impossible to break. I'm saying that you've been ruling through fear, not strength. Your walls convinced the galaxy the resistance was pointless. So nobody really tried. They threw weapons at you, but they didn't believe they could win. They were already defeated before they started. And you believe differently?" Okonkwo smiled. "Humans don't believe in impossible. We're not smart enough. Someone tells us something can't be done, and we don't listen. We try anyway. We fail, and we try again. We do stupid things, crazy things, things that make no sense. And sometimes, just often enough, the impossible becomes possible." She pointed upward, toward the damaged walls. "Your walls are the smartest defensive system in the galaxy. They can analyze anything, counter anything, adapt to anything. But they can't handle things that don't make sense. They can't deal with attacks that have no logic. They can't defend against people who don't play by the rules." The Hierarch was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost thoughtful. "What do you want, human?" "I want you to let them go. All of them. The 46 species you've been holding hostage. The civilizations you've trapped and taxed and controlled. Let them go, and we'll stop our attack. And if we refuse..." Okonkwo's smile faded. "Then we'll keep doing what we're doing. Eventually, your walls will fail completely. And when they do, every species in this region of space will know that the Vornathi can be beaten. Your power isn't in your technology. It's in the fear you create. Once that fear is gone..." She did not need to finish the sentence. Vashkal understood. Without the walls, without the reputation of being unbeatable, the Vornathi would face every grievance, every grudge, every act of revenge that had been building for 11,000 years. "You ask us to give up everything we have built," the Hierarch said. "No," Okonkwo replied. "I'm asking you to build something new. I'm asking you something that doesn't depend on keeping others down. Your people are brilliant. You created the most advanced defensive technology in history. Imagine what you could do if you worked with other species instead of against them." She held out her hand, a human gesture of agreement and trust. "What do you say, Hierarch? Do you want to keep fighting a battle you're going to lose? Or do you want to start building a future that doesn't require walls?" Vashko looked at her hand. He looked at the damaged walls above them, flickering with unstable energy. He looked at this small, tired, impossibly confident human who had done what no one else in the galaxy had ever managed. And slowly, very slowly, he reached out to take her hand.